Peter went up to Jesus and said, "Lord, how often must I forgive my brother if he wrongs me? As often as 7 times?" Jesus answered, "Not 7, I tell you, but 77 times. So the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who decided to settle his accounts with his servants. When the reckoning began, they brought him a man who owed 10,000 talents, but he had no means of paying. So his master gave orders that he should be sold together with his wife and children and all his possessions to meet the debt. At this, the servant threw himself down at his master's feet. 'Give me time,' he said, 'and I will pay the whole sum.' The servant's master felt so sorry for him that they let him go and cancelled the debt. Now as this servant went out, he happened to meet a fellow servant who owed him 100 denarii, and he seized him by the throat and began to throttle him. 'Pay what you owe me,' he said. His fellow servant fell at his feet and implored him, saying, 'Give me time and I will pay you.' But the other would not agree. On the contrary, he had him thrown into prison till he should pay the debt. His fellow servants were deeply distressed when they saw what had happened, and they went to their master and reported the whole affair to him. When the master sent for him, 'You wicked servant,' he said, 'I cancelled all that debt of yours when you appealed to me. Were you not bound then to have pity on your fellow servant, just as I had pity on you?' And in his anger, the master handed him over to the torturers till he should pay all his debt. And that's how my heavenly Father will deal with you, unless you each forgive your brother from your heart." How often should I forgive my brother? As many as 7 times. Not 7 times, I tell you, said Jesus, but 77 times. Oh, great, says one of the disciples. Not only do I need to forgive him, now I've got to do maths as well. Don't know how often my brother's had to forgive me, or I've got to forgive him. We don't keep count. It's not what it's about, is it? You don't keep score. Oh, I forgave you, you need to forgive me. It's not the way it works in practice. It's about relationship, isn't it? It's what you do when you're in a relationship with someone, when you care about someone. You try and forgive each other. You try and put things behind you so that you can move forward. Relationship. That's why I'm sitting in a car park at the hospital in the rain, waiting for my brother who's got an appointment. It's just what you do. It's not about who needs forgiveness more or how often you should forgive. It's just about relationship. It's what you do to maintain a good and healthy and loving relationship. I often wonder about that parable of the king and the 2 servants. I used to wonder about the amounts, and I'd get a bit distracted by them. What's the difference between 100 denarii and 10,000 talents? So I looked it up one time, but it doesn't really have anything to do with the parable. Not a great deal. And I've been wondering, how would we read that parable? How would we listen to that story if the values of the debts were reversed? If the first servant owed the king 100 denarii, what's that? About £50? But the second servant owed the first 10,000 talents, which is in the billions, about £3 billion. Would we listen, would we think about that parable differently? Because I've got a sneaking suspicion that's how some of us at least think the parable should have been told. Yeah, we all know that we're indebted to God. that we need God's forgiveness, that we do things wrong. But there are far worse people than us, aren't there? People who do far worse things, people who need God's forgiveness, who are more indebted to God than we are. If we reversed the values of the debts, maybe it would be more reflective of how we feel, how we think things really are. But you know, to think like that is to miss the point of the parable altogether. At least I think so. The values of the debts are given for emphasis. They're exaggerated. They emphasize the need for forgiveness and that willingness in accepting forgiveness to be forgiving in our dealings with others as well. But if we focus too much on the size of the debts, we get distracted. At least I get distracted. It's a bit like the story of the camel and the eye of the needle. You can go down so many dead ends when you start thinking about that. And they're irrelevant for all sorts of reasons. I think the important thing in the parable is the king forgives the debt of the first servant. All of it. The whole thing. The king couldn't be more forgiving, more generous in his mercy, more generous in his love of that first servant. He wiped the slate clean. He gave him a fresh start. That's the point. The absolute, perfect, generous, merciful love of God. That's what the parable's all about. It's about understanding the love of God. It's about our experience of God's loving, merciful forgiveness. It's about our being so moved by that experience that we cannot but be loving and merciful and forgiving in our dealings with others. It's not about who needs forgiveness more. It's not about how often we should forgive. It's not even that we should know that we are forgiven by God, and therefore it is our duty to be forgiving of others. It's about being so infected by our experience of God's merciful love that we naturally show forth that same love to others, that we are changed people because of our experience of God's loving, merciful forgiveness in our lives. Changed to become similarly loving and merciful. Loving and merciful people that finds expression through the way we show that love and mercy to others. We can't know that love, that forgiveness, just by listening to a story. But the parable is an invitation to try and open ourselves up to that experience of love. Allow it to become a part of who we are, so that we too show forth the love that God has for all people.